When we study serial killers, we're not just looking at what they did. We're asking why they did it. What were the emotional ruptures, the internal distortions, the behavioral cues that led someone down a path of repeated, premeditated violence? Few cases test the boundaries of psychological comprehension like that of the Green River Killer. Between 1982 and 1998, dozens of women vanished in the Seattle-Tacoma area. Many found weeks or months later, discarded near wooded areas or riverbanks. The person responsible would eventually confess to killing at least 71 women. That man was Gary Leon Ridgway. In this analysis, we'll examine how his behavior, upbringing, and interpersonal pathology created one of the most chilling cases of serial homicide in U.S. history. Born in 1949 in Salt Lake City, Utah, Ridgway's early life didn't raise alarms at first glance, but hidden within the folds of his seemingly average upbringing were psychological red flags. Ridgway admitted to wetting the bed well into adolescence, a behavior often correlated in developmental psychology with feelings of helplessness and shame. He described his mother cleaning him afterward in a manner that was, in his own words, confusing and emotionally arousing. This event created a toxic intersection of embarrassment, maternal control, and inappropriate stimulation. He also harbored violent thoughts from a young age. At 16, Ridgway stabbed a young boy, a disturbing act that was dismissed as a one-time incident. But to a trained eye, this is indicative of early-onset behavioral disorder, one that, if untreated, can evolve into adult psychopathy. In retrospect, Ridgway's early experiences formed a trifecta of emotional instability, maternal fixation, sexual confusion, and latent aggression. After high school, Ridgway joined the U.S. Navy and served in Vietnam. During his deployment, he frequently engaged with sex workers and contracted sexually transmitted diseases. Instead of acknowledging personal risk, Ridgway projected blame outward, developing a growing resentment toward the women he paid for sex. This pattern, shifting accountability to others, became a cornerstone of his behavior. He later described these women as the root of his problems. In his mind, they weren't people anymore. They were symbols of betrayal, temptation, and shame. Psychologically, Ridgway sought control in the areas of life where he felt most powerless. His relationships were often short-lived. He married multiple times, but each partner reported rigid behaviors, obsessive demands, and in one case, religious fanaticism. He appeared devout, yet exhibited no true empathy. He read the Bible aloud to neighbors while also visiting sex workers in secret. This stark contrast, public virtue and private vice, speaks to his dual identity, a common trait in organized offenders. By 1982, Ridgway began acting on his compulsions. His victims were primarily young women, often runaways or sex workers. From a clinical standpoint, his victim selection was deliberate. He chose individuals who were socially marginalized, people he believed wouldn't be immediately missed. He later admitted he targeted them because they were easy to control. His method was horrifyingly consistent. Pick up a victim, gain their trust, sometimes by showing photos of his son, engage in sexual activity, and then strangle them, often during or shortly after intercourse. Strangulation, as we understand it in forensic psychology, is deeply personal. It requires sustained contact, focus, and exertion. It's not an impulsive act, it's a statement of domination. Ridgway once said that strangling gave him complete control, something he lacked in other areas of life. His killings weren't crimes of passion, they were rituals. Ridgway developed a routine that became increasingly calculated. He would dump bodies near wooded areas, often clustered together, sometimes returning to the sites to engage in disturbing post-mortem acts. These behaviors reflect what we call compulsive ritualization, repeating actions to regain psychological equilibrium. It wasn't enough for Ridgway to kill. He needed to revisit the act. The fantasy didn't end with death. It lived on in memory, in proximity to the remains, in the psychological power it gave him. He even admitted to contaminating crime scenes intentionally, leaving behind cigarette butts and gum he didn't use. Tactics meant to confuse law enforcement. To his wife at the time, Ridgway was attentive and affectionate. She once described him as the perfect husband. He'd take her to the very sites where his victims were hidden, places they used for picnics and romantic outings. This level of cognitive dissonance is staggering. But to Ridgway, compartmentalization was survival.
He separated his dark compulsions from his family life with clinical precision.
By the mid-1980s, investigators recognized they were dealing with a serial killer. The Green River Task Force was formed, and profiling experts were brought in to build a psychological sketch of the killer. In a rare and controversial move, detectives consulted another serial killer, Ted Bundy. Bundy suggested that the perpetrator likely revisited the bodies, may have engaged in necrophilia, and was probably living a double life, someone who could pass as normal. He was right on all counts. What's more disturbing is that Bundy and Ridgway shared numerous psychological traits: lack of empathy, superficial charm, need for control, and complete emotional detachment from their victims. Despite multiple arrests for solicitation and prior suspicions, Ridgway slipped through the cracks. He passed a polygraph test and even cooperated when questioned. But in 2001, advances in DNA technology finally linked him to 4 victims. His arrest was uneventful. He showed no emotion. During interrogations, he was calm, polite, and almost bored. When asked why he did it, he didn't offer excuses. Instead, he said killing became his career. To avoid the death penalty, Ridgway cooperated. He confessed to killing 71 women and led authorities to several of their remains. In 2003, he was sentenced to 48 life sentences, 1 for each confirmed murder at the time, plus 480 years for evidence tampering. Even years later, more victims have been identified, including 2 teenage girls, Lori Ann Ratspotnick and Tammy Lyles, in 23 and 24. What made Gary Ridgway such a disturbing figure was not just the number of his crimes, but the methodical, emotionless way he carried them out. He wasn't impulsive. He wasn't insane. He was entirely aware of his actions. He planned them, repeated them, and integrated them into his life as if they were a job. From a psychological standpoint, Ridgway fits the profile of a highly organized offender with antisocial personality disorder. He lacked empathy, engaged in manipulative behaviors, and showed no remorse, all while maintaining the illusion of normalcy. But even more important than understanding Ridgway is remembering the women he harmed. Each one had a story, a family, a life beyond how it ended. They are not just part of a criminal profile. They are the reason this story must be told with respect and clarity. Because the true purpose of studying evil is not to admire it, but to learn from it, prevent it, and never forget those it tried to erase.